Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Ms. Fry's having some, we're going to talk about connectivity problems. We're having some issues in the West Coast, which seems to be appropriate for our meeting here this afternoon. I didn't call it, but anyways, I'll call the meeting to order and welcome to meeting number 82 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, May 8th of 2023, the committee is meeting to study Report 2 of the Auditor General of Canada, Connectivity in Rural and Remote Areas. We will now begin the opening remarks as we have... Okay, point of order. Ms. Harder?
Thank you. Sorry. Yes. Thank you, Chair. I just had a quick question, and that was I was hoping that the Chair, but in case, since that's shifted on us, perhaps the clerk could inform us. We have 1 day left for the minister to appear on the main estimates before they're due back to the House. We have a motion before this committee that was passed to invite the Heritage Minister here to speak to the main estimates. We haven't heard from him since the election of 2021 with regards to anything financial. And so I'm just curious if we can anticipate him coming on the last opportunity, which would be Monday, May 29th.
Thank you for that question, Ms. Hardy. We'll go down to Mr. Biddle.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. The minister's father recently passed. I think his desire was to come on May 29th. I think there's been some discussions with the clerk on coming that day. I think that's the preference, but things are now up in the air with, and I think the honourable members would understand. I know the preference would be before the main estimates, but he's happy to be here just after. I know there's a deadline, but with the family emergency, I would think everyone would have that understanding. His intention is to appear before this committee on the estimates, whether they be on the 29th, which is his hope, or shortly thereafter, if that's forced upon him because of the funeral arrangements.
I have to apologize, Ms. Thomas. I did call you Ms. Harder. My apologies. So, Ms. Thomas, if the minister can't make it for the 29th, as you know, he did have an issue, a family issue. You've heard the explanation here from Mr. Biddle. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I think my concern is the fact that we've had a year and a half pass since he was first invited to this committee, and he has turned down every single one of those invitations with regards to financials, and that concerns me. And so, yes, I understand that his father passed away, and my sincere condolences. But that is in the moment. That does not excuse a year and a half of his absence with regards to financial matters.
Mr. Biddle.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. And I didn't think condolences could sound as sarcastic as that. And I'm shocked we're actually debating this. Mr. Chair, I have the floor. The minister has been, and minister and his staff have been talking with the clerk. I know the intention was to appear on the 29th. Mr. Rodriguez was away. His father was in the hospital for an extended period of time in Mexico, where the minister was for an extended period of time out of the country, which is why he wasn't in the House of Commons last week. This is getting petty. He will be here. He will appear. He wants to appear. When he has appeared before, I believe the honourable member who has expressed condolences filibustered the last time that he was here. He sat in the back waiting to appear. There really wasn't a desire to get to him that point or other points as well. He has appeared 2 or 3 times since our election in 2021, and he stands ready to appear again. It's a reasonable request by the committee to hear on estimates. Again, if there wasn't the family emergency, he'd be here on the 29th. If he can't be here on the 29th, he will be here shortly thereafter.
Mr. Housefather.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say this maybe from in a different way. This committee has always been respectful of what's happened with people's families. We recently had a witness who didn't appear when he was summoned because of a death of somebody who had been threatening him. We now have a minister whose father died yesterday morning. He died on Wednesday. I think we all want to extend our deepest condolences to the minister. I think from everybody's perspective, that's a genuine feeling that we would have for anybody, our friends, our colleagues. And again, the minister has stated he wanted to come on the 29th. Hopefully he will be able to, but we all understand his dad died in a foreign country. We don't know when the funeral arrangements will be. And I think this is really a time when somebody's father just died to really not start, I don't think this conversation is appropriate at this time. So I would just respectfully ask everybody, regardless of, any past acrimony, that we all just respectfully pay our condolences and move on to this discussion at a future date. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. We have Mr. Shampoo, then Mr. Julian, but we'll go to Mr. Shampoo here.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question which the clerk might be able to answer. Normally, we are supposed to see the minister before May 30th. It would be, from a human standpoint, very difficult to ask that of him since he is grieving with his family. Would it be possible to extend that deadline? Has it ever been done? Is that deadline of May 30th set in stone in circumstances like these? It is a precise date, but sometimes when committees are studying a given subject, like the main estimates, all votes are reported to the House. So we could look at the estimates in the minister's absence and see the minister later, or would that be a useless exercise? Well, if it is useful, the meeting can be held, but it will be on the specific topics and not on the main estimates as such, not on the votes as such.
Mr. Julian.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that we all would like to express our deepest condolences to Minister Rodriguez. I have just found out about his father's death. It's very sad. I lost my father and then my mother 18 months ago. It takes quite a while to emerge from that grief. I think it is sufficient for me to say that the minister will come when he can, and we will then put questions to him on a range of matters, including spending. That is not an issue for me. I think the main thing that should emerge from our committee today is our deepest condolences, and we stand with him and his family. Our deepest condolences on his father's death.
Thank you for everyone's comments. So then on Monday when we come back, it has been suggested we could have the subject matter study on the main estimates. There would be no votes, but we would be here for 2 hours then? Mike? Clarify what I have screwed up.
No, so the subject matter study would be any study of the estimates after the deadline. So then you could do a subject matter study. And you wouldn't be doing the votes because the votes would have been deemed reported back at the deadline.
Okay. So what are we going to do on the 29th then? What is the wish of the committee when we come back on Monday the 29th, Mr. Biddle? Sorry, Mr. Biddle. It's a great day.
Sorry, I'm in. Sorry, I managed to get in now, Chair and Clerk.
You've helped
Teddy
me
Fry
quite a bit.
speaking. I have no idea what's going on. So.
Well, I've just... Well, we've had a flood here, Madam Chair, and I know we're going to talk about connectivity, and I know you had problem getting in here today, so that seems appropriate. But we're talking about Monday the 29th. Unfortunately, the minister's father has passed away, and Mr. Rodriguez would not be available on the 29th, so we're actually talking, maybe, but we're just talking about the 29th. I will give Mr. Biddle a chance to take the floor now, if you don't mind, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, Oliver.
Thank you. Okay, excellent. As we're, it's a little soggy up front here after a little bit of a spill, but that's okay. I would just propose we continue with the presumption. I know Pablo wants to be here. Pablo wants to appear. In the event he doesn't, perhaps it's just a good opportunity to have a committee business because we have so much. I know there's a lot of discussions that need to happen on sport. This meeting is being cut short because of votes and this discussion. So I think we can be productive either way if Pablo can or can't attend.
Any feedback from anyone here on the 29th? I'm going to actually give you, Madam Chair, the floor, and I will go sit in my seat and behave myself for the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Kevin, thank you so much for saying. I am actually on this meeting through my phone because my Surface Pro has decided it doesn't like me and it will not connect. And so I'm connected through my phone, which is very interesting. Anyway, I was thinking that Chris is suggesting something that I think is doable. If the minister cannot come on the 29th, we can do what we were going to do on the 1st of June, which is witnesses for the first hour and a committee meeting for the second hour in camera. And then maybe on the 1st of June, the minister can come. I don't know what people think about that. It's just switching clearly without any big problems involved. Entertain discussion? No, nobody with their hands up? No one wants to say anything?
Well, just ask, Hetty, we're going to ask the clerk to kind of confirm all this, if you don't mind, Mike.
So, good afternoon, Dr. Fry. So, I was just speaking with some of the members. We do have a couple of organizations confirmed for the Thursday. So perhaps if we can find a witness or two to fill in on Monday, we could also have Mr. Biddle's suggestion of committee business and, perhaps immediately following any witnesses we can have for the Monday.
That would be fine. I mean, we have people who can come, so let's do it if whatever is possible, so that the minister. But we need to fill in the 29th. And if we switch, can we not just switch the witnesses who are due on June the 1st and the committee for 1 hour? Can we not just do that? Is that possible, Mike? Hello?
We will look into the schedule and find something that fits.
Because I think on June the 1st, we had a possibility of the Canadian Olympic group, and then we had the fencing, if I'm not mistaken. And then that was an hour, and then we were going to go to the second hour for committee business. Can we do that on the 29th?
Madam Chair, I'm going to kind of wrap this up because we do have guests in front of us.
Actually, I thought I was taking over the chairing of the meeting, Kevin.
Mr. Shampoo's got his hand up. You're in a tough position today because of connectivity, so I'll just back you up, but I do see Martin Shampoo that has a comment to make here.
Madame la Présidente, comme le dit
Madam Chair, as the Vice Chair was saying, your connection is a bit difficult. It must be beautiful weather on the West Coast, and the sun must be causing difficulties for your connection. But I'd like to come back to the issue of witnesses and their availability for the 1st of June. My colleague, Mr. Lemire, is with me today and has just confirmed that Judge Aquilina would be available as well on May 29th. So should the committee wish it, it would be difficult to have at least some of the June the 1st witnesses, the witnesses that is scheduled for June the 1st, appear on May 29th.
That is what I'm asking the clerk, if that is a possibility.
Yes.
All right, so that sounds like a plan. And if we have the committee meeting in camera on that same day, it will tell us where we're going to go next. Anyway, we would have set a plan. We would have been able to put a box around things. And when the minister can come, hopefully he has promised that he will.
Mr. Julian has his hand up.
Peter? Peter?
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are two things I'd like to say first. I don't think your connection is strong enough. It comes and goes, and we do need to protect our interpreters who are doing very important work. It might be better in this case to cede the chair for today to Mr. Waugh, who's in the room. Secondly,
Hear me very well that I'm going in and out. I will be happy to do that. I wasn't sure what my connection was. So if my connection is poor, can we hear from the clerk if my connection is poor? And then I will see the...
Yeah, the connection is, there's a lot of choppiness, there's a lot of interruption in the video. Audio doesn't seem too bad, but the video is dropping in and out, and that is usually a good indicator that the audio is soon to follow.
All right, well then, what I will say to the committee is I will let Kevin chair the rest of this meeting, as he kindly offered to do, and I will kind of drop out of the committee.
Okay, Ms. Fry, thank
If
you.
that's cool with everybody?
Yep.
Kevin, thank
Yep.
you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fry. So are we as clear as mud then on the Monday when we come back? We will have guests for the first hour. Second hour, we'll do committee business.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Champ.
Mr. Chairman, my colleague, Mr. Lemire, at the last meeting had read a motion that did not come to the vote. I think it was a formality. So if I may, I would like to dedicate the rest of our time to the witnesses who are here today. Will you allow me to reread the motion so that we can dispose of it? Agreed? That in the case of the study on sports and security, the committee require members of Sports Canada to produce a copy of the report by Sharon Banaka, which was completed in 2018 on the toxic environment at Gymnastics Canada, and that they also produce a copy of the statements made by members, and that those documents be sent to the clerk no later than 4 p.m. May 18th. That is today. So we're giving them a couple of hours longer. I will amend the end of the motion to adjust that timing. Thursday, May 25th. And that those documents be submitted to the committee clerk no later than 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday, May 25th, 2023.
All agreed with this? Fine, thank you. Okay, so now we'll move on to our two guests here. We have the report, two of the Auditor General of Canada, connectivity in rural, remote, and maybe even urban centres, as we found out here today. So let's welcome the opening remarks. Thank you, officials. Karen Hogan, you will have the floor here for 5 minutes, and you have Sammy Hanish also with you here today in the Canadian Heritage Committee. So the floor is yours, Ms. Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss our report on connectivity in rural and remote areas, which was tabled in the House of Commons on March 27th. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Joining me today is Sami Hanush, the principal who was responsible for the audit. In this audit, we looked at whether Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada and the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission had improved the accessibility, affordability and quality of high-speed internet and mobile cellular connectivity for Canadians in rural and remote areas. At a time when so much takes place online, it is critical for all Canadians to have access to reliable and affordable high-speed internet and mobile cellular services. This is a matter of inclusion. When services are of poor quality and are unaffordable or unavailable, people are effectively excluded from participating fully and equally in many aspects of life today. This includes participating in the digital economy, accessing online education, banking, medical care, and government services, and working remotely. We found that overall, access to internet and mobile cellular services had improved across the country since our last audit in 2018. However, the federal government's strategy has yet to deliver results for the many rural and remote communities and First Nations reserves. Internet connectivity in rural and remote areas remains below 60% and below 43% on First Nations reserves. Nous avons aussi constaté.
We also found delays in approving projects that were meant to bring services to rural and remote areas. For example, final approvals under CRTC's Broadband Fund took an average of almost 2 years. Delays mean that 1.4 million households who are already underserved or not served at all are still waiting to be connected. Access to services is not just about having the infrastructure in place to connect households, businesses, and institutions. It's also about the affordability and reliability of those services. We found, however, that the two organizations tracked only some dimensions of the affordability and quality of services. For example, they considered pricing as part of affordability but did not consider household income. If the price of a service is beyond a household's means, then connectivity will not improve and some people will remain excluded. These findings emphasize the persistent digital divide between people living in urban areas and people living on First Nations reserves and in rural and remote communities. Being connected is no longer a luxury, but a basic essential service. The government needs to take action so that there is affordable, reliable, high-speed connectivity coverage for Canadians in all parts of the country. Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Ms. Hogan, right on time. We'll start with a 6-minute first round. We'll start with the Conservatives and Ms. Thomas.
Sure, thank you. And Chair, before asking my questions, I just wanted to give notice that we are tabling a motion today with regards to a study on the changes made to the Canadian passport. And so this motion, of course, will be moved at a different time, but it reads that the committee immediately undertake a study regarding the recent announced changes to the Canadian passport, in particular the decision by the government to remove images that reflected Canadian culture and history. That the Minister of Heritage be invited to appear as part of this study, and that this study consist of 3 meetings, that witness lists be due within 5 days of adoption of this motion, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. I acknowledge that it is not a part of the business today, and so I do not wish to move it, but I do wish to give notice.
Thank you very much. So now you have 6 minutes. You're the opening round. Away you go, Ms. Thomas.
And thank you very much. Sure. Ms. Hogan, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and for initiating by writing a letter saying that you would be pleased to come should we invite you. And of course, now we have. So it's nice to have you at the table. I'm curious, when I read the report, about 26% of the funds from the CRTC have been given out. That leaves a whole whack of cash that is still sitting there. Why is that?
So we looked at a period of time. I think it's important to know the period of time during our audit. And our audit started in July of 2018 and covered all the way until January of 2023. So over that time, while there has been a lot of commitment of funds in many budgets towards rural connectivity, there should be about $2.4 billion that was available for spending. And as you pointed out, we noted that only 40% of that had been spent by January of 2023. What I would put as the reason why it was so slow to go out the door was really the length of time that it took for CRTC and Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada to approve proposals for programs. So, for example, the CRTC said that it should take about 17 months, or about 10 months, to look at a project and approve it and award funding, and it took almost 2 years. So it's that length of time that I believe just caused delays in funding going out the door, and hence projects advancing, and hence Canadians having access to internet.
Okay. And I'm curious as well, because there's 2 pots of money. There's one that's with Industry Canada and there's one that's with the CRTC. Both are meant to help with connectivity issues across this country. In your report, you outline the fact that these departments don't seem to be talking to one another, and so there's not a coordinated effort as to how these funds are being rolled out the door, but also in terms of how applications are being assessed and then granted. And so I'm curious if you can comment on that.
There are many departments that are involved in some of the funding. Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada being the main one with the CRTC. And there, we actually saw really good coordination between the departments, including the Canada Revenue Agency that has a tax credit and Indigenous Services Canada that funds other programs. But it was really the slowness in approving projects. And then to also think about the need to coordinate with provinces. So we found that, when a province did have internet or mobile programs, the federal government did its best to coordinate with them, and that again caused some slowness in funding going out the door.
Is there a need for there to be multiple departments overseeing different funding pockets, or could there be one fund created that is responsible for, rolling out this program with regards to increasing connectivity across the country, and in particular in rural and remote areas?
Well, that question would be one really to ask the government, because it was a bit of a policy choice when the connectivity strategy was created in 2019. Who would be responsible for the funding initiatives that were then included in that connectivity strategy? So all I can tell you is that it wasn't designated as a horizontal program, but we did see some good coordination with all of the departments that were involved. They're just slow at approving proposals.
Would your recommendation be then that it continues to be split, or would you see value in bringing it together and having it under one department?
Well, really, what I see here, I think, again, it's a question on how the program wants to be run, or the initiatives want to be run. When you want to target initiatives in Indigenous communities, Indigenous Services Canada is likely the best party with knowledge and already connections on the ground. But that's a decision really that the government makes. I simply look at whether or not they roll it out effectively and efficiently, and here there could be opportunities for improvement.
Okay. It's interesting that you mention that, because in your report you pointed out that fewer than 50% of those in remote areas, particularly in Indigenous communities, fewer than 50% actually have access to minimum speed internet. That's just minimum speed internet. You talked about the fact that that's impacting everything from education to access to telehealth, to access to commerce, to access to the new public square, which is engagement online. And so I'm curious as to how that can be improved. I mean, at the end of the day, if we truly want to pursue reconciliation, which I believe as a country we do, there is no reconciliation without economic reconciliation. And so those folks do need to be included in the opportunities that the internet provides.
I couldn't agree with you more that we need to ensure as a country that Indigenous communities are involved in matters that affect them. What we did find here was that 6 out of 10 households, as you pointed out, do not have access to high-speed internet, or what we define today as high-speed internet. By 2030, we don't know if the current speed will be considered high speed, and that's actually one of the recommendations we gave to the government that they need to look at. The main buckets of money around getting infrastructure to rural and remote communities or Indigenous communities really come from the main departments that are here. I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it's not just about getting the equipment there, but then about making sure that it's affordable, and affordability needs to look at income of households, and that's where I think the government's missing half the picture.
Ms. Hogan, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. We'll move now to the Liberal Party and Lisa Hepner. Lisa?
Thank you, Chair, and through you, thank our guest, Ms. Hogan, for being here to answer our questions today. I would like to ask about the Connecting Families program. This is a program that provides low-income families and seniors with high-speed internet packages for $20 a month. You focus on affordability in your report, but this program wasn't included, and I'd like to know why, if I could.
You're correct that program is not a program that we included in our audit. It's my understanding it's a fairly recent program, and it really is about people applying and being eligible. So we focused in on where the majority of the money under the connectivity strategy was, and it is really focused on trying to get the infrastructure up to rural and remote communities and First Nations communities, and then tackling other issues like quality and affordability. So it wasn't scoped in because we were focused on the larger bucket of funding related towards access.
Like you say, it's a more recent program, and that brings up an interesting point. I noted that the audit covered the time period from July 2018 until January 2023, but only has 2021 connectivity data. Could you explain that for us, please?
So that was the only data that was available. So we went to Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada and CRTC and asked them for the latest data they had on access. And they only had 2021 data. It's my understanding, actually, in preparation for this hearing, I inquired about, is the 2022 data available? I believe that they've now received it from all of the internet service providers, and they're working their way through it. Usually they provide updated figures in the fall of a year. So we were only able to audit what information the government had on hand at the time of our audit.
Okay. Would you say, the focus of the audit was to determine whether the government of Canada has improved access to affordable and high-speed internet through rural and remote regions of the country. So would you say there has been improvement?
Yes, I would say that, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there has been improvements since our 2018 report on connectivity all across the country. But there still is a large digital divide when you compare urban centers to rural and remote. You have 4 out of 10 households that don't have access to high-speed internet, and then that grows to 6 out of 10 when you look at Indigenous services. So while progress continues
clearly
every year,
more to do.
Yes.
Yeah, it shows that there's more to do, clearly. But would you say, or would you agree that the government surpassed its goals that it set for 2021, connectivity goals?
I believe the goal in this strategy was to connect 90% of Canadians by 2021, and that goal was achieved. What that goal, however, masks is that there is a divide when you pull out rural and remote communities and Indigenous communities. Because in the urban centers, it's over 99%. So while the goal was met, there's a lot of work left to be done.
Right. But so since 2021, the total number of households connected in rural Canada increased from 62% to 69%. So given the recent global pandemic and the short period of time, would you say that this is a significant increase?
Well, when I look at the fact that across the country there's 1.4 million households that are still underserved or not served at all, I think that's a lot of Canadians. To put it into context, that's like every single person who lives in the city of Montreal does not have access to internet. It's a lot of people. And when you think about how the pandemic shifted so much of society to an online mode, that the country should strive to try and meet its goals sooner and faster. It's a long time to wait till 2030 to have access to internet, to do your banking, or to be able to shop.
So you would say no, that you don't think it's a significant increase in connectivity in rural Canada. You would like to see more. It's not, you wouldn't consider it significant. I think that is what I get from your answer. And then connectivity in Indigenous households increased by 5% since 2021. I think that's the more recent data. Does that give you hope, at least, to see that the numbers are going in the right direction?
I will always be pleased when the numbers go in the right direction. I just encourage the government to reach its goal faster.
And I would note that since 2015, about 2.2 million Canadian households have received access to better and faster internet. And on the Government of Canada's website, on the national strategy to connect all Canadians, by the end of 2022, 93.5% of Canadians are connected to high-speed internet in comparison to only 79% of Canadians in 2014. So just to put those numbers into perspective, is that a significant progress, do you think, from 79% to almost to 93.5% of Canadians who are connected?
I do think that's a sizable progress, but it still leaves those most vulnerable and underserved.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you very
Hogan.
much.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Hepner. There was discussions about a 6 o'clock extending it. We don't seem to have a unanimous agreement here, but we'll try to get as close as we can to 5:30 or a couple of minutes over, depending on our rounds, if you don't mind. So we'll have 6 minutes now. Mr. Shampoo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Ms. Hogan, Mr. Anoush, for being here with us today and for offering to meet with us to discuss the report. It's much appreciated. Not all witnesses we invite so gracefully accept to meet with us, agree to meet with us. I find some of the recommendations interesting. They're all interesting, but some leap out more than others, I should say. We've all been through a pandemic that have changed things and our awareness about what essential services are. We had a fairly brutal wake-up call during the pandemic. If I remember, before the pandemic, we had conducted studies on connectivity across Quebec and Canada and raised some red flags, pointing out that in remote regions there was very poor internet and cell phone connectivity, and it becomes a public safety issue. because people are getting rid of their landlines. Many services are now only available online. And we pointed out that, or realized that high-speed internet needs to be seen as an essential service. The government recognizes that. Now that we see that, I believe you would agree, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I believe you would agree that the government has to put its money where its mouth is, as it were. Services have to be available for all Canadians. I understand that there are major difficulties in connecting very remote regions to good internet, which are difficult to reach with current technology, but we know there are available technologies that exist and that could be used to connect to some very remote communities. Here's what I'm getting at. Achieving goals in stages, that's what the government is doing. And it has set 2030 as the deadline. In your recommendations, one of the things that stands out is assessing whether that goal is sufficient. This is 2023, and I don't think somebody who's connected to 5010 has enough internet speed. The goal for 2028 and 2030, well, are these goals realistic, or should they not be reviewed so that people don't end up being connected to inadequate internet speeds? Should we wait another 5, 8, or 10 years to be updated with sufficient technology? Have you thought about that angle? We did recommend that it should be considered to see whether the target speed will still be considered high speed in 2030. We did wonder about that. The target was set, or the goal, I should say, was set in 2019, and the 50-100 goal was considered adequate. But every 10 years, speeds changed. We go from 2G to 3G to 4G. So changes come, fundamental changes come about every 10 years. So we thought the government might need to rethink that goal. Well, it is our job to challenge the government, but do you believe that setting 50-100 as the speeds in 2019 as the goal speeds was adequate? Shouldn't it be much faster than that by 2030? Wasn't it a somewhat lazy goal? In 2018, when we recommended that there be a strategy, a goal, and a time frame by which that goal would be achieved, I was happy that there was a strategy and that it contains goals. Now we have to see how far those goals might have to be improved. What we've seen with programs and the funding that's being provided is that a lot of adjustments sometimes need to be made. So we need to see whether programs are adjustable and that the target speed can be modified. I don't have much time left. You spoke about something I find very interesting: work and cooperation between Ottawa and the provinces and Quebec. My colleague, the member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue, Mr. Lemire, who is often here, had already asked that responsibility should be transferred to Quebec. That was done. The funding and the responsibility for connecting communities in Quebec was transferred. Should that strategy, in your view, be applied to other provinces, leave provinces to take on that responsibility with the funding, of course, because they know their provinces better? Do you think that would work? I think that is discussion for the federal government to have with individual provinces. What we saw was that when there was good cooperation, the administrative burden for individuals and businesses applying was reduced. So improving access improves connectivity. Well, I don't want to boast about Quebec, even though it is the most wonderful place. I would say that goals are almost completely achieved, and Canada is putting off that 100% goal to 2030.
For 6 minutes. Peter?
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Hogan. I hope my connectivity is good. I'm speaking to you from the West Coast. Just to follow up on Mr. Champous's question, did you see a difference between Francophone and Anglophone communities in terms of connectivity, or was that something you did not look at in your study?
Je vous encouragerais de peut-être visiter notre site web.
I would encourage you to visit our website. We have a map of Canada, a graph figure that shows the connectivity numbers per province. We didn't focus on whether a community was Francophone or Anglophone. We looked at remoteness to see whether there was a difference among provinces. Our study was not language-based. So I would like you to tell us whether the nation of Quebec, which has the highest connectivity, which by contrast is the province with the lowest connectivity. Do you mean overall or in urban areas? Well, there is a particular problem in rural and Indigenous communities. So in view of that, which provinces have done best and which have the lowest results? What we should point out is that there are rural and remote regions in all provinces and territories. If I look at the map that we have established, I would say that the province where rural and remote communities have the least connectivity are the Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Nunavut. In fact, in Nunavut, remote communities have almost no communities with high-speed internet. And which are the best? Again, for rural and remote regions, the top results are in Prince Edward Island, followed by New Brunswick. And what about Western Canada? Would you like me to give you the percentages for all provinces? No. Well, the West would be British Columbia. That has the highest connectivity in rural and remote communities. Well, clearly that is what I was looking for, because I know that the BC provincial government has done a great deal to improve connectivity. And it does make a difference within a province. The types of programs in place do make a difference. And in BC, as you so clearly pointed out, BC, with the programs that it has in place, has done well. If I may make a comment, it is an NDP government.
Response and the statement from the minister after you issued your report. And the Government of Canada, this is from Minister Hutchings, and the statement said the following: the Government of Canada has made available over $7.6 billion to expand access to high-speed internet in underserved areas. Now, looking at the figures from your report, as you mentioned earlier, you've seen investments of $949 million in terms of what is actually spent. So in your study, in terms of the actual money that was invested, that is actually served to expand access to high-speed internet, where do you see that $7.6 billion as a credible figure? Or is it really your experience that it's been a little shy of $1 billion in terms of actual investments that have helped expand access to high-speed internet?
So I'm not sure I know where the minister received her numbers, but what we did note in our audit report is that committed was around $8 billion over several budgets and several announcements. And that's why we focused in on how much was available, because that $8 billion is over a longer period of time. So up until 2023, there was $2.4 billion of those funds that were available to be spent, and it's only 40% of it that has actually been spent.
And so that's where you come for the $949 million. So the minister is reaching for the skies in terms of speaking notes, but the actual money invested in the ground is just a little over 10%, which is shocking given the discrepancy for rural and Indigenous communities particularly. In the next round, I'm going to be asking you about the consequences of that. But it's fair to say that the government has been a lot of talk and no action when it comes to actually expanding access to rural Canadians and to Indigenous communities to high-speed internet. Now, my final question for this round is around the issue of affordability. And in terms of tracking how much it costs in each of these communities, would you say that you have a best practices in terms of costing, either through a province or through other programs that are in place, so that it's actually affordable access to high-speed internet in communities? What is the best practice there?
I just want to make sure I understand your question. You're asking me about the best practice on determining what would be an affordable price for high-speed internet?
In terms of evaluating prices across the country, what has been an example of a best practice that has actually led to affordable high-speed internet in some communities? Which province or territory has done the best in that regard?
Unfortunately, I don't look at what the provinces and territories do. I can only look at what the federal government has done. And in the connectivity strategy, the federal government has a target linked to affordability that's only based on the price of the service. So they'll do comparisons across the country or to other international prices. In my view, that's missing half the story, because internet, if a household can't afford internet, then you're not going to increase connectivity if it's beyond their means. And so you need to track household incomes and the link between the price of the service. The OECD recognizes that is something that should be done. And the department acknowledges that there's a link, but they're just not gathering data around household incomes.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan, and thank you, Peter. We'll move on to the second round. We'll start with Martin Shields. It's a 5-minute round. Please go, Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for you. There's the reference to maps, the National Broadband Internet Service map. And there was some reference in the sense that they're not accurate in a sense of what is covered and what's not covered. Do you remember your review of that?
I will see if Sammy wants to add to it, but I will start. There is a connectivity map on the Government of Canada website that any Canadian can access, and you can see what areas of the country have high-speed internet and mobile services or not. The issue with that is it comes from service providers. There's not a lot of vetting on the accuracy of it, and then the maps are updated. And then stakeholders are informing the department about inaccuracies. And so we've made a few recommendations around ensuring that information is up to date and accurate. It's old. We saw that it was out of date for almost 20 months or so. And what that means is that if you're going to submit a proposal to help increase accessibility in an area, but it looks like on the map it already has connectivity, well, you might not bid in that area or put a project forward in that area, and the reverse might be true. So it's important to have accurate information to make proper decision making.
So that could relate to service in the sense in rural and lower served areas, not increasing that?
Well, if it looks like on the map that they already have connectivity, and in fact they do not, yes,
Right.
that could result in missed opportunities for some areas that truly need connectivity.
Absolutely. The definition of rural, for you, what is the definition of rural in sense of connectivity?
Communities and.
I think I'll ask Sammy to give
Yeah.
you that definition. How's that sound?
Sure. The definition we used in this project was a definition that's being used by StatsCan and various federal departments, and it defines rural communities as less than 1,000 inhabitants. And remote can also be part of those rural communities, or can be isolated in a different sense that they're they're smaller, but they're also not near adjoining communities that potentially they could then piggyback on connectivity. So
Here's a challenge I see, and we're talking about economics. And if we're talking about a highly technical agri-industry, they're not located in communities. So when you're talking about connectivity and you're talking about communities, we really have a challenge here. For example, I have people in the ag industry, and when I say the word pivots, people sometimes know what I'm talking about, but they're running those from farms that they're high tech. And I've got, as I met today, somebody in the egg producing industry in rural, and they're very technical and very short of, but they're not in a community. So how do we address that issue when you say your definition is communities, but yet if we're talking about economics in our highly technologically ag sector, they're not in communities?
Well, we didn't make up the definition, right? We're following the definition that Statistics Canada uses because that's one where there's data gathered around the country. And I think that speaks to why we need to be careful as a country to compare ourselves to others without thinking about household income and other aspects. Our country is geographically vast, and there are many areas with low population. Unlike the United States, where it's very dense in many areas, that it's easier to reach so many more individuals with the infrastructure. So that's why it's important to really consider the particularities of Canada as the strategy plans its way out.
And I think that's critical when we're talking about economics, when the government's talking about an increase in productivity with one of our most technologically advanced sectors in agriculture. They don't have that capability of being connected. So that's really problematic in rural in the sense of the definition that we have. Moving to another one, and you talked about reaching targets. The plan to, over the last number of years of reports of trying to reach that target of the OCD above average. Have any idea why do you think it's going down in the sense from 6.4 down to 4.8% of the average?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I know, Sammy and I know what you're pointing to. Is this within our report, or are you reading these OEC statistics from somewhere else?
Because you've talked about what the CRTC is doing in the sense of meeting their targets. And so there is the last three reports that said they're trying to achieve above the average OCD targets, and you've referred to the OCD and what their targets are, but you're not familiar with it then.
I'm not sure I know what you're actually talking about. I referred to the OECD when it came to what a definition of affordable should look like.
Yep. So I just assume you know a lot about the OCD and their targets for internet service and what Canada under
Well, I know
CRTC
some
is.
of them, but I'm not sure I know what the reference that you're making. My apologies.
Okay, no problem.
Okay,
Yeah.
we're going to move on, Mr. Shields. Thank you very much. I gave you a little.
So we
little
did. Maybe
extra.
I could just
No,
tell you
that's
that we focused in on the targets that Canada set itself in its own strategy, not comparing those to any international targets or best practices that the OECD might have.
And those were our targets I was talking about.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hogan. We'll move on to the Liberal Party for 5 minutes. Tim Lewis. Tim, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our guests, the Auditor General, Ms. Hogan, and Mr. Hanush. I want to thank the Office of the Auditor General of Canada for their report on rural and remote connectivity. We appreciate the recommendations, and I really look forward to continuing the government's work on broadband. We're on our way, well on our way, to surpass our goal of connecting 98% of Canadians to high-speed internet by 2026 and 100% of Canadians by 2030. We heard some numbers earlier. In 2014, I believe it was, only 79% of households had access to high-speed internet. And in Kitchener-Conestoga today, we've got 89.5% of homes have access, and that's including a strong agriculture sector. So something I think Canadians should be proud of. And I talk to people in small communities like Cross Hill or Dorking, Hawksville, Heidelberg, Linwood, Millbank, St. Clemens, New Hamburg, Wellesley. These are small communities, and they've received funding to expand high-speed internet coverage. And most of these projects are scalable projects for future needs, which is closing that digital divide between urban and rural communities. I know earlier we heard the importance of scalability. Like I said, most of these new projects, 80% are scalable. And I explain it to my constituents as if you're going to be building a road, you leave room for extra lanes. And that's what about 80% of these projects are doing for future growth. So, but we know that there's more to do and then remain committed to do that work. And that's why I think it's important that you're here and your report is so important. The governments of Canada and Ontario not that long ago announced funding of almost $12 million for infrastructure, broadband infrastructure in Waterloo region, which connects thousands of homes and businesses, mostly in my riding of Kitchener-Conestoga. And the federal government signed partnerships with, I believe, 6 of the provincial governments, Ontario being one of them. So can you tell us what your assessment is of the effectiveness of these partnerships and how they're helping governments achieve its national connectivity goals? What lessons can your report share about the importance of putting the partisanship aside, coordinating and working across party lines and across jurisdictional lines for a common goal in helping our rural communities?
Well, we did look at how the federal government coordinates its efforts with the provinces. We felt that it was important to make sure that that coordination was happening so that every dollar spent, whether it be federal or provincial money, would be spent to go further and not just double up on a project. What we found is that most of the provinces that had connectivity money or initiatives already had a memorandum of understanding with the federal government and that they were doing their best to coordinate. We saw that it reduced a lot of administrative burden when it came to accessing funding. But then we can only focus in on the delivery of the programs federally. And that's where we looked at what the CRTC and Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada was doing. And we found that they were really slow in approving projects, and that's contributing to people waiting longer for internet access.
Great. Thank you. Yes, you used that word coordinating a few times. I think that's important. Recently, I hosted a roundtable with the Minister of Rural Economic Development. We had our rural mayors, businesses, other stakeholders, and discussing the issues that face our small communities, many which we've heard today in committee. Broadband internet was one of the major topics, and we said how federal government needed to work together with provinces, territories, municipalities, Indigenous communities, and the internet service providers. So your report noted that the federal government's not solely responsible for improving connectivity. So do you think that provincial and territorial governments and the private sector are doing their part with cost sharing in working to these goals? And in what ways can they further step up, and how can that be incentivized?
So I think that's a difficult question for me to ask when I really can't look at the books of provinces or private corporations and service providers. What I can look at is what the federal government does. And I can only hold them accountable for the commitments that they've made and whether they're achieving them or not. I was pleased to see coordination, and that's a step in the right direction. But, elements like the tax credit that's available, ISED doesn't know whether or not people are using it and accessing it. So I think there's still opportunities to further advance that coordination and collaboration. But really, I think I would come back to the main point of the 2 main departments in our report, needing to really improve how they review, approve, and deliver funding to service providers, because it's that concrete action that will actually improve connectivity across the country.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you for your time.
You're to time, and we'll go now to the block for 2.5 minutes. Mr. Shampoo.
Oui, 2 minutes et demie, mais je connais votre générosité, Monsieur le Président. Je trouve très intéressant les réponses que vous donnez. Je trouve très intéressant aussi d'en apprendre un peu sur le travail et la façon dont vous...
Very generous, Mr. Chairman. I find the answers you're giving very interesting, Ms. Hogan. This is the English channel. This is the English channel. Well, you heard what I said. I was listening to you earlier saying that you work with the tools that you have, the information that Statistics Canada provides, and is based on experts having established what a rural region is, for example. When you conduct your audits, do you ever feel as if you're not working with the right tools? And would you care to make recommendations on the tools you have with which to work, for example, the criteria used by Statistics Canada? Well, it's not up to me to comment on policy. The policies established by the government. What I can do is make recommendation on departmental implementation. So when it comes to Statistics Canada, I would say they are the experts in establishing statistics. I could have a conversation with them, but I wouldn't make a recommendation. That doesn't mean I wouldn't have a conversation with the Deputy Minister to say what we have observed in order to improve delivery of service. I found that a very interesting point. Businesses, important businesses, for example, in agri-food, in areas that are considered remote, but they have the same needs as people in urban areas need. So it seems to me that a study on connectivity needs when industrial parks are full and industries have to relocate, connectivity becomes a very important issue. Could you perhaps see your way to recommending that some zones or some criteria should be reassessed? In your report, I also found it interesting that you said that internet and telephone services are not equal everywhere. Affordability is not equal everywhere. In some remote regions, it costs a fortune. Do you believe that the government's answer, making the link to economic development, is satisfactory? Do you think that what they're doing will be enough to reduce costs of internet service, particularly in remote regions? I was concerned about affordability, true. I had a number of discussions with the Deputy Minister at Innovation, Science and Development Canada. I think that it is a policy issue for the department. If the definition of affordability needs to include household income, I had a number of discussions with him and encouraged him to review the issue with the minister, because just looking at speed is only half the issue. Thank you. Do I have 2 minutes left?
Yeah, that does mean wrap up. Thank you. We'll move on now to Peter Julian for 2.5 minutes. Peter.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wanted to come back to the consequences of not having in place high-speed internet, and wanted to speak about consequences for rural communities, for Indigenous communities, consequences like distance education, the reality of not being able in more isolated communities to access the distance education that so many people rely on to enhance their skills and provide more abilities to contribute to their community. Around distance health as well. I know that the BC government has done a lot to expand access provision to distance health so that people in rural and more remote communities, indigenous communities, can actually have access to healthcare. It's also an issue of fundamental economic development, that having access to high-speed internet makes a big difference for a community in order to actually develop and build on its economic foundations. These are all fundamental issues. So when you talk, Ms. Hogan, about the government only spending $949 million, though they like to advertise that they've made available over $7.6 billion, I see that as a fundamental failure of this government to actually walk the talk and provide those supports. Can you speak to what you see and what your report indicates in terms of the consequences of not having access to high-speed internet in education and healthcare, in economic development, etc.?
I mean, as you mentioned, I think many of us take for granted that we might leave here today and on our cell phone pay a bill before we head off to home. There are many individuals in rural and remote communities who can't do that. But how to put a price tag on missed opportunity is a really difficult one. What we saw throughout the pandemic was that so much of Canadians' lives shifted to an online environment. Many small businesses who don't have access to the internet likely, had lost revenues, and that's a really hard thing to quantify. So, we can't get at that in our report, and that's why it's so important to not look at the numbers of accessibility across the country and say we're doing a great job, because the urban communities mask what's going on in rural and remote and First Nations communities. And it's about ensuring that all of our recommendations get addressed, properly costing how much it will take to reach those hardest to reach, because it is expensive, and that hasn't been done yet.
Thank you, Peter. We move on now to the Conservatives. We welcome Alex Ruff to the committee. Mr. Ruff, for 5 minutes.
Thanks so much, Chair, and thanks so much for coming today. Look, I'm really glad I got the chance to show up at committee today and partake, because this is such an important issue. I represent the riding of Bruce Grey Owen Sound, a very rural riding in Ontario, and in a riding that's actually the second highest demographic of seniors, which presents another challenge. We'll get to that. But I just want to commend you on the part of your report there, I think paragraph 2.69, where you basically point out that neither Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada nor the CRTC could tell Canadians whether the affordability of internet and mobile cellular connectivity had improved. It's a pretty damning statement, and I just want to provide additional evidence as somebody that personally can't get over 5 megabits per second down as service, but I don't even get that because, of course, the service providers don't actually deliver what they advertise, and it's only at 3 any time that I've checked it. But I'm just one of many of the residents in my riding that just have no connectivity, and this in particular becomes a huge issue as the federal government moves more and more services, as you identified, to the digital realm, and when you don't have it. A couple points I want to get to is in your paragraphs talking about not only the internet service availability map. I really appreciate the question that Mr. Shields brought forward about how there's that misperception, because I actually have local internet service providers that are trying to provide that service, but when they apply to ISED or to try to get the maps updated, they've been going on 2+ years to even get the service that they are providing on the map or to be recognized. And is this common more than just in my riding? Is this a common problem I think you hinted at throughout Canada?
Well, we did speak to service providers and other stakeholders, and it was a very common comment that we received, was that the maps were outdated over many months, I mentioned earlier, and that's sometimes inaccurate information. And that's why we made a recommendation to the government to find a better way to challenge that. One, you need more timely information, but also then you need to sort of double check and challenge the information to ensure that the quality is there. The service providers shouldn't be the quality mechanism to have an accurate map.
another thing on the funding side of the House, in particular, the Universal Broadband Fund, is one of the key elements that the federal government is trying to provide support to this. My pushback on the whole fund in the first place, the money seems to be flowing to the wrong sectors or wrong providers. The vast majority of this money seems to be going to, in my observations, to your major internet service providers, the big telecoms, and not as much to these smaller, especially for the rural-sized areas, because they just can't compete for it. And I was shocked, actually, and disappointed when I know, I know Mr. Tim there, he's in, in the same neck of the woods in Western Ontario, is that the SWIFT program, the Southwestern Integrated Fiber Technology Program, that was funded previously by the federal government, but federal, provincial, municipal, and private or internet service providers all had a funding. It worked great. And what the benefit of that program was, is it actually concentrated more on the last 5 miles. My biggest complaint about a lot of this funding is going to these service providers to put internet where they're going to go anyway, where the business model is. And I think tying to the national strategy, the biggest shortfall is it's not focused. And the money's not flowing to the most expensive spots to get to those last, 5-10% of the Canadian population, but in particular in those rural and remote areas. Did you suss any data out that sort of backs up that my observation there?
So you had many observations in there. I'll try and tackle a few things. I think the money going to larger service providers is because most of it's about infrastructure, and they're the ones who are bidding and can afford that kind of projects. We do know that a lot of projects came from municipalities in order to expand access. When we look at the funding, so you talked about how costly it is to go the last mile. That was actually one of our recommendations. The strategy has not fully costed out what it will take to reach everybody by 2030. And those that are left are far and in remote areas and will likely be very costly. And that's why we recommended that costing needs to be done now in order to make sure that the resources and the money is available to meet the 2030 target.
Chair, recognizing I'm pretty much out of time, I'd just like a quick comment, is that within the national strategy is on the maintenance aspects too. We're getting lots of complaints that, not only is it's about the reliability side of the house, it breaks down. I had a local area in my riding just this past weekend where, again, seniors, that the only thing they depend upon is their phone, their internet, and the companies that sort of maintenance breaks down. And unlike 30 years ago when we had a lot more people were on landline and everything like that, it was dependable, it got fixed quickly. Now it's taken 72, 96 hours. Anyway, recognizing out of time, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ruff. We'll move to Mr. Housefather for 5.
I think I'm next.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Courteau then, in studio, as we say, for 5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I believe that probably in my province of Ontario, probably the most important sector is the agriculture sector, and of course, rural Ontario plays the largest role in making sure that sector stays healthy. I think it's a $50 billion sector in Ontario, and I've gone out to farms, and I'm not from a rural community, but obviously Don Valley East depends on our farmers, or else we wouldn't be able to survive. But I've seen some of the technology that they use and the mesh networks they put on farms that connect to the farmer's smartphone. They're able to monitor crops and look at humidity and how well the yield rate, and they make improvements based on this data and technology. So without a question, rural communities, we need to invest and we need to continue to support our rural communities in order to continue to grow that sector, which is without a question among the most important sectors in Canada. I've noticed that in the report there was a lot of money left over in some funds, and one of the recommendations was that they need to improve the process of application and the approval process. What does improving the approval process mean? And what's the challenge there?
Mm-hmm. Well, we really focused in on CRTC and Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada and looked at the commitment they had made as to how long it would take to review an application and then provide notification of whether it had been approved for funding, and how long it actually took. So when it came to CRTC, it took almost 2 years to go through that approval and assess the application versus the 10 months that they had told applicants it would take. And when it came to ISET, it was almost a year when they had communicated it would take a month. When we asked them why did this happen, then the main issue was they received much more volume than they expected.
Interesting.
And so there's definitely a desire to help improve connectivity across the country. And so now those two entities need to improve their administrative matters in order to get funding and approvals better. I think the last thing I would add there is that when we even talked with certain applicants, CRTC sometimes took almost 2 years to communicate with someone.
Right.
And just not knowing meant that some providers abandoned their project.
Right.
And so even though it might have been worthwhile, it's no longer going to happen.
Did you do any analysis of the complexity of the application process?
I'm going to ask Sammy to look at that in
And I've got a whole bunch of questions, so I'd like to just maybe really quick answer if possible.
We did look at the complexity, but the complexity is well beyond the approval process. There's the whole implementation of the project and delivery right to the end. So we tried to look at it, but there weren't many projects that had gotten to completion for us to review.
I also noticed that you made recommendations to look into emerging technology like satellite technology, and we all know the Starlink project that's happening. Did you find that there was the technology that's emerging? Did you do a deep analysis of, the technology that's coming forward, satellite technology, and how we could, leap into new technologies to accelerate this entire process?
So we didn't focus so much on emerging technology, but looked at what's out there and really focused in on the spectrum, the use of spectrum licenses, where the radio frequency bands are used in areas where you don't have the hard cables. And we made some recommendations around improving access to spectrum and sub-licensing that we hope will help improve access in some of the rural communities. Some changes were recommended from our 2018 audit and put in place. It's just they were just put in place, so it's too early to know whether this change to how spectrum is managed will actually yield better results for rural communities.
I know that the scope of an audit is looking at existing programs and to do an analysis, but at the same time you may come across ideas that people bring forward within the system. So did you come across any alternative deployment systems like cooperatives and things like that may look that you would recommend back to the government to start to look into?
I think one thing we did highlight in the report was for many of these infrastructure projects, one of the considerations for the departments was to look at scalability and whether or not the project going forward would be scalable to future speeds. And I think that's something that was a very good inclusion into the conditions of these projects. We also looked at the low Earth satellite coverage to a certain degree to get a sense of how that's being deployed and how that can be used to temporarily or in the short term provide connectivity at a high speed until the fiber optic cables can reach the community. So these were things we looked at.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mike. And
okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question on Starlink, because Starlink in rural Saskatchewan is exploding, if you don't mind me saying. It seems to be the most popular way to get connected these days. Okay, we're on the third and final round. Here's, because we're coming close to 5:30, we'll give the Conservatives and Liberals 5 minutes each. We'll go to the Bloc and NDP for 2.5, and then we'll wrap it up as we got constituency week coming up. So the Conservatives for 5, Mr. Shields, please.
Chair, in the report you did a lot of work on, and I think you've alluded, we're going to read some of the provincial results in rural. Why do you think there's such a discrepancy? Because I see high numbers in some provinces and much lower numbers in others. Why do you believe there's a discrepancy?
I think it could probably just tell you anecdotally, it's likely because there's more funding provincially or municipally devoted to connectivity in certain provinces versus others. As I mentioned, there was 7 provinces that have MOUs because those provinces have connectivity strategies and initiatives, and the others do not. So I would imagine that some of that would contribute to the disparity among provinces.
Any suggestions of how that could be evened out in the sense of directions you might suggest to make it? Are you suggesting the provinces and the other ones need to get more involved, the communities more? How are we going to resolve this discrepancy between province to province?
Well, I would expect that that's something that the federal government does when it assesses what projects to fund. Right? So if you have an accurate map that shows you that a certain province is really underserved, then you want to likely target more funding there than a province that's almost fully served. So I would expect that would be done at the level of project approvals by the federal government.
So when we get to Indigenous, then the number is much smaller itself. Now, the federal government knows where Indigenous communities are, where they know reserves and communities are, but yet it's much lower than the provincial averages across the country. So that's not provincial, that's not municipal. So the partnership there is back to federal and Indigenous?
Well, I think in those cases of many Indigenous communities, it comes down to not having the actual infrastructure yet in the areas where Indigenous communities are located. So it's about having the right financial incentives or programs in the strategy to ensure that infrastructure gets to the most rural and remote areas. And that's why one of our recommendations about actually costing out what it will take to reach those hardest to reach really needs to be done soon so that a better plan can be outlined between now and 2030.
And that's interesting because the first and second largest reserves in Canada, one is in my riding and one's next door. And we're not talking rural and remote, but yet their numbers are down. So it's not rural, it's not remote.
I'm not sure that I would have much more to add to that.
And I've got that, and I understand. On the 10 months to 2 years almost to approve projects, as you said, it takes a lot of talking. Now, it's fine to do a lot of talking, but the idea is to get something done. How do we move that target from almost 2 years down to 10 months?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's a challenge I think that both of these entities have to address. As I mentioned, they didn't expect the volume that they had received. They now know that they need to do differently so that this happens quicker. And I mean, the funding of those projects even delays other spending, right? So the infrastructure bank will give loans once construction starts, but construction can't start if you haven't been approved for funding. So there's really this sort of snowball ripple effect. And that's why it's really up to CRTC and I said to administratively go faster so that this can have some concrete action.
Even though they've hired a lot more employees, it still hasn't reduced the time.
We didn't really audit the whole process,
Right.
unfortunately, and I don't know where those resources went when they hired extra people.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just got a motion I'd like to read, please, to wind up. Motion is to summon Vicky Atreides that consider the Auditor General report tabled on Monday, March 24th, or March 27th, titled Connectivity in Rural and Remote Areas. The committee summoned Vicky Atreides to Chairperson and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Radio and Television Communications Commission to testify before the committee as soon as possible for no less than 2 hours.
Okay, so you're just going to table that then?
Yep.
No, it's moved.
Sorry, moved.
It's moved?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Biddle?
Thanks. I guess we haven't done committee business. We don't know where we're going. We have so few meetings left. I have concern about the language. We typically don't summon officials. I think the CRTC has appeared every time that this committee has invited them. I don't know. I don't know what the rationale is behind that. I know there was some animosity the last couple times the CRTC chair was here, and there was again filibustering, and call them and not want to hear from them, even though you've called them and summoned them as a particular witness. I don't know why we're doing this on the fly. I know we've heard some evidence, and perhaps it's useful to hear from the chair of the Canadian Radio and Telecommunications Commission. I really don't think it's appropriate to summons that individual, but I think it's far more important for this committee to get on a path to figure out what we're going to do. We have an important study on sport, which I think is every member's priority in terms of the protection of kids. And this is very important, as the Auditor General has mentioned in her report, very important in terms of it being fundamental for Canadians to have that access. But we're dealing with the safety of children. That was this committee's priority, and we've taken a meeting to hear from this, even though the industry committee is, I believe, this is their jurisdiction. We talk about the CRTC, but when everyone has talked about the Government of Canada, that is referring to industry or ISED or whatever it's being called these days. This is a study that's better left for them. So I want us to get to a point where we have a sense of where this committee is going. And then we want to hear from the minister. We've just passed a motion to hear from Gymnastics Canada. We want to hear from other sports organizations. We want to go through this whole list. I think there's 7 meetings left, maybe 8, in terms of what's left. Are we putting this back in there? Is this something that we want to see in the fall, which may be more important? Are we turning this into a study? Are we duplicating what's going on at industry? And I don't know, like last time we had discussed, there was a motion before industry, but it wasn't yet confirmed as to where the where that motion had been going. But again, we don't want to be duplicating our efforts in terms of what's going on there. I don't know what's the priority of the committee. We're going in and out. I guess Mrs. Thomas is the one that gets concerned whenever I speak, and she can heckle all she wants, and that allows me to go off in that direction if she wants. I know we agreed to end it at 5:30, and I don't grant consent to go beyond that, and I think that was something that we had all agreed to. And again, these are things that can be discussed in advance. I don't know why the purpose of dropping this in at the last minute. This is a committee that has worked very well through the sports study. But I don't know what the point of the surprise is. It doesn't make sense, especially when we have the absence of the rest of this committee's stated objectives in terms to get to the bottom of what we want to look at. And I know sport is at the top of that. I would love to be in a position, and perhaps it's wishful thinking, I would love to be in a position, and I'm sorry to the analysts, to give them homework for the summer to say, this is what we want to do. And I think this should be a priority so that we can come back in September and say, let's focus on this report. Let's have recommendations, because the minister has already started announcing important initiatives to do things. So I guess my question is, let's just deal with this at a committee business meeting. We have to discuss that. We have to figure out what the next business, we have to figure out what the business of this committee is. And it really doesn't make sense to start acting in this matter in terms of dropping motions like this at the last minute without any consultation amongst the parties. And I'm sure this is something that we could have debated. We talked about, and Mrs. Thomas made a very good point in terms of we haven't heard from Pablo on estimates. That was a very valid point to make. back when she had made it. I know there's some discussions of his intentions, but that was for an earlier discussion. But we agreed. We made provisions. We had hoped that the minister would appear on that day. And again, this may be a valid thing to hear from the CRTC in terms of that. I guess my experience in terms of calling a minister on estimates, none of the questions are on estimates, and I expect that a few of the questions asked of the CRTC will actually be on the Auditor General's report. So I would really just like to just move this to a point where we can sit, we can discuss it, we can have a reasonable discussion in terms of where we're going, set out our agenda.
Point of
there are
order.
studies.
A point of order, Mr. Julian.
Move we adjourn.
Great.
Motion to adjourn? You can't do it on a point of order? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Biddle, then.
On that point, I will move then that the meeting be adjourned. Per the agreement of the committee, and I don't consent that we go any further. Yes, there was.
I was never asked for my unanimous consent. You have to include everyone for unanimous consent.
The chair said it. The chair went and consulted with the Conservatives, consulted with all the parties, the opposition parties. You can't change your mind at this point. We announced it. There was no discussion.
Yeah, Ms. Thomas, I did consult with you. I did consult with the bloc. I'm sorry, Mr. Julian, you weren't in the room, so I didn't consult with you, but it was agreed that we would, in fact, around 5:30, and it is past 5:30, so I will accept the motion then to adjourn. And before I do so, I just want to thank the Auditor General.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming here today, Ms. Hogan, and Mr. Hanoush. I want to thank you. And saying that, enjoy Constituency Week. We have 10 days away, and we'll see you on Monday, May 29th.